So when I was looking on Anthropologie's website, they had a lot of like fabric wall hangings that were really cool. So I wanted to recreate something similar from the thrift store. I found this old like wool pillow cover at the thrift store. It was in the shape of a square and it was just like a thick fabric, and I thought it would be really cool for this project. So I picked it up. I'm also going to be using a package of the gold rings that you can buy at Walmart. They're $2.88 and these are typically for wreaths, but I'm going to be using it to trace. So I'm going to be making a geometric pattern on this pillowcase. So I'm going to take the larger ring and I'm going to put it down at the bottom and I'm going to trace around the ring. Now I wanted it to look not like a circle. I wanted it to look more like it was rounded at the top and longer at the bottom. So I just kind of drew down a little bit at the edge and then I'm going to, at the bottom, just paint across the bottom. Next, I took that middle ring and I'm going to trace the bottom half of it because I wanted to make a half circle. So I'm going to be using just a straight edge and I'm going to draw the line across. And then with the smaller ring, I'm going to use that and trace it at the top. So here's another hack. If you ever have sample paint, they are really inexpensive and they're great for DIY projects. So I'm going to be using this color Rainstorm by Sherwin-Williams that I had. It's a simple blue color that I think looks amazing. I started by trying to use a smaller brush and had to upgrade to a larger brush just because it was more of a textured fabric and the paint went on better. I'm simply just going to follow the lines and trace around and paint this piece. Now I only did one coat of paint, but I made sure that it was covered pretty well. So with fabric, you really don't have to wait and do drying coats. Just kind of put the paint on until you're happy with it. Now I wanted to have a hanger on this, so I used some nautical rope that I had to create a hanger. Now I hot glued the cord in place and then I also reinforced it with duct tape. You want to make sure that it's nice and secure on the back, especially since it's going to be on fabric. You want to make sure it holds really well. Next, I'm going to take a really long dowel rod. These are actually those long bamboo skewers that they sell at Dollar Tree. And I'm going to cut it down to be the size of my pillowcase, because if I don't have something sturdy on the back, what's going to happen is because it's fabric, it's going to kind of fold into itself when I hang it up. So I want it to hang nice and straight. So you could have like, a paint stick or something. It doesn't have to be a dowel rod, just something on the back. And again, I'm going to hot glue that on and also add duct tape. Now, how gorgeous does this look in my bedroom next to this new chair that I have? If you're anything like me, you love looking at high-end decor websites, but you often see things that you just don't want to spend the money on or can't afford. I know I often see wall art that can be $500, $600 that I'd love to have in my home, but I don't want to spend the money. Well, I'm going to show you today how you can have those awesome looks without spending that money. This first project, I went shopping at one of my favorite stores when it comes to large wall art, and that is the Restore. I get some of the best items here. And so I grabbed a piece of plywood. You guys, this sheet of plywood was only $4 and I knew it would be perfect for the project I wanted to do. First thing I did was put it next to the wall where I wanted to hang it, just to kind of get an idea of the size of the wall. It was about the size I wanted to, but whoever cut this board, it wasn't straight, so I needed to make some cuts on it. So I went ahead and drew a straight line on both sides of my board so that I could cut it off and make sure I was starting with a nice rectangle before I even started the project. Then I just used my saw to cut both sides of my board. I wanted to create a frame for this, so I went to Lowe's and bought 1x2 boards, and I think for this project I needed 2 boards. And I'm just going to lay them out around my plywood, cut them down to size, and then I'll use my saw to cut the boards. So once I had the frame put together, the fun part could start. I grabbed some joint compound from Lowe's. I also grabbed a trowel and some scrapers. So I'm just gonna start by adding the joint compound to my board. Just getting it on the board is gonna take a little bit of time. Next, this is where you want your joint compound to have some nice texture. I went in with my scraper and just kind of moved it around, made sure I had everything covered, but just kind of got that texture that I wanted. Now you're gonna come in with your trowel, and this is in the tile section at Lowe's if you're wondering where you can pick one of these up. I just grabbed the most inexpensive one that they had, but I wanted to create just some easy formation. So I went in and added some fun lines. This is just going to give me added texture to my piece. Let your joint compound dry overnight so that it really has a chance to kind of harden up. The next day I came in to paint, and I think I would have started by painting the whole thing white, but I didn't do that. I actually came in with a brown color paint that I had and just used my roller to roll on one of the little trowel formations that I created. And once I did that, I realized, no, I should have painted the whole thing white. So then I came in with a white paint and my brush and added on the paint. Now these are just sample paints that I had on hand that I'm using for this project. You don't need anything fancy. You don't need to go out and buy a bunch of paint.
Could we let love go? How could we move on? Move on. Why you wanna let me go now? Are you saying that to change your mind? For love or pity, let me know now.
Now, once the white dried, I came back in with a cream color and added that as well. Now have fun with this, paint it however you want, do whatever formation you want. Like, this is the fun part, so really make it your own. I wanted something really neutral for my living room.
Lose my mind again. How did you stop loving me?
Now, to go back to the border that I had created earlier, I initially thought that I wanted to stain it with special walnut, which is a color I had.
Let love go. How could we move on?
But I didn't really like the color of that. Then I came in with the color maple and used that as well. So I kind of had like a combination of stain for this, but ended up going with a lighter stain. But for the stain, I'm just going to add the stain on and wipe off the excess.
Baby, go blind. Why you wanna let me go?
Then I'm gonna take those border pieces and add it around the edges. I did walk around the edge and make sure there wasn't any joint compound along the edge that would kind of hinder me from nailing in the boards. I'm gonna be using my brad nailer with 2-inch nails to put in the side pieces. Make sure everything's where I want it, and then I'll nail them in place. And here's a look at how this piece turned out. Now, I've seen pieces like this go upwards of $500 online. The total cost of my materials was $43. So I have an idea for a wall hanging that I want to do. I'm actually going to head to the thrift store and find some frames, but at Walmart I'm picking up a bunch of different greenery. So I have things like this. I also grabbed some of these cute ferns. I don't even know what that is. There's some boxwood, so I'm going to show you how to put something together really quick and easy for great wall art. You cannot beat the price of frames at the thrift stores. So I wanted a collection of 5. All of these frames are priced at $1 each. So I'm going to start by removing the backing. So I'm just going to use my wire cutters to pull these out, and then all the contents in the frame, I'm just going to pull that out because I don't need it. Now I didn't do any additional prep work to these frames. They were in really good condition. If you want to give frames from the thrift store a cohesive look, spray them all the same color. I'm using a flat white spray paint and I just did about 3 coats.
My hair, the words goes away. What I am trying to do is say I love you.
Next, I'm going to add in some of that greenery we picked up from Walmart. So I'm going to use my wire cutters and I'm going to work on one piece at a time. So here I'm putting in the ferns and I'm just going to concentrate on putting them down in the lower corner. Now with these frames, I'm going to change it up. Some I'm going to put in the lower corner, some I'm going to put on the top, some on the bottom, just giving a variety so that it'll make a really nice wall grouping. Now here's a trick to cover up where you have all of your ferns meeting. Take some little pieces of leaves and you're going to hot glue those on top of where you put all your glue. Next, I'm going to use the eucalyptus garland and I'm going to concentrate it on the lower half. And then I'm going to add in some additional leaves and making it nice and full. I love this little hanging plant and I thought it would look cute going up and over. I almost want it to look organic, kind of how it's just laying there. And again, I'm going to cover up the bottom part of my stems with a eucalyptus leaf. I'm going to continue adding greenery to the rest of my 5 frames. Now the way that I like to hang these on the wall is first I like to put them on the floor in the arrangement that I want them to be in. Next I'll use command strips and I'll just put them on the top of these frames and then push them into the wall. You want to make sure you get them on there really well. And I love the way this grouping turned out and it was super inexpensive. All right, so next up, we're going to be doing a wall hanging. You guys, I have really been into wall hangings lately, and this wall hanging was inspired by something that I saw off of Pottery Barn Teen, and there's similar wall hangings like this that are around. So I wanted to make one myself. So I grabbed a board that I had in my garage. I didn't even cut it, like it was just the length that it was at, and it ended up being 50 inches. So I'm gonna start by staining my board, and I'm gonna be using a color called Golden Oak. I'm just going to brush it on and then wipe off any excess. So next I went to Michael's to find yarn. They were having a buy 2 get 1 sale. So I ended up buying 6, but I'm only using 5 for this project. So I picked up 5 different shades of really natural looking yarn. So creating the tassels did take quite a bit of time because I was going to make 30 tassels. So each of my 5 yarns, I was making 6 tassels for them. So that takes a while. I think in the end, I mean, I kind of went and was doing some other stuff. I think it took me around an hour and a half, 2 hours to make these tassels, but you could, you know, sit in front of the TV and do this. So I really refined how this tassel process was working. So I wanted some really long, like skinny type of tassels. So I took a piece of cardboard. I'm trying to be better, you guys, at my measurements. So the cardboard that I used was 11.5 inches. I know I'm bad about giving you guys measurements, so I'm trying to get better at it. So then what I did was I took one of my yarn colors and I wrapped it around the board 18 times. Then I took the whole section of yarn off of the board. Then I came in with some macrame cord that I had purchased off of Amazon, and and I'm just going to wrap the macrame cord and tie it in a knot in the back. And with the macrame pieces, I cut off some pretty long strands because I didn't know how long I would be hanging them. So the macrame cord strands were pretty long. So I tied it in the back and then I cut off the little end. Then with my longer end, what I did was I took a little bit of hot glue and put it in the middle of the top part of my tassel so that I could hide the cord in the tassel. That way, if they flipped around, you wouldn't be able to see it. So I hot glued it and then I kind of bunched up the yarn around it. So that way it looked like the tassel was just in the middle. Then I cut off the excess down at the bottom so that it made a tassel and it was fringy. So I repeated this steps for all of my yarn until I had 30 tassels. So I was excited to finally get to this next step. So I laid out my board so that the back of it was facing up. Then I started to lay out all of my tassels the exact way I wanted it to look. So I didn't, make any sort of pattern. I really didn't want it to be like a pattern. I just kind of wanted to make them look different. So I just kind of picked up colors here and there. So don't plan it out, don't go like 5 colors, then start at the next one. You want it to be a little bit more random than that. And then just kind of vary your height. Once you have it completely the way you want it to look, make sure you stand back and look at it. Then I came in and I hot glued each of them to the top of my board. Now I didn't measure them out. I didn't make sure that they were absolutely perfect because I don't know, I feel like I didn't want it to be super perfect. Next, I'm going to come in and cut all of the cord at the top, making sure that I don't have any hanging over the edge. The next thing you want to do is go through and trim all of your tassels. You want them to be like pretty even, and this is going to make a big difference in your tassels. So I went down to the edge and I just trimmed them off. Now you could probably do this before they're hanging, but I just went ahead and did this step at this point. Now to hang it on the wall, you could use some wall hangers. I'm going to be using some command strips and hanging it on the wall. Now since you do have the pieces on the back, you probably want to use more command strips than you think so it holds in place. Or you could always just use some like picture hangers on the back. And here's a look at how my wall hanging turned out. Okay, so I need to get a board. So I always come over to like these common shelf boards, and I'm using this as a backdrop. So I'm gonna be getting the one that is, let's see, it's 12 inches by 6 feet, but usually it's more around like 10.5 feet. So I'm gonna be getting this board. I usually get 6 and 8 feet, so I'm gonna grab one of those. So I have some signs that I'm going to put on these boards, and they're just going to be regular size printer paper. So I'm going to mark this board so I have an extra 2 inches at the top and bottom, and then we're going to cut out the board so I have 3 of them. Next, I'm going to stain my 3 boards with Special Walnut by Mini Wax. I'm just going to lightly brush on the stain, and then I'll immediately wipe it off. Since all of this wall art is going into my new office, I wanted it to be very motivational and just kind of to give inspiration throughout the day. I created some printables that I thought would be great and motivational, and if you would like to print them off as well, I'm gonna link them below in a PDF for you so you can have these printables at home. You can print them off on your printer. I printed mine off on a thick cardstock because I'm going to be doing a tea stain to it, and it just wouldn't hold up as well if it was on regular printer paper. This is a little fun technique I like to do when I want something to have an aged appearance. So all you have to do is get a tea bag, and then you're going to put it in a water source. It doesn't have to sit in there for a while. Then you're going to simply take that tea bag and you're going to put it all over your paper, and you're essentially just antiquing your paper. So you can do this as little or as much as you want. If you think it has a little too much, you could always get a wet paper towel and kind of run it over your paper, but you just don't want to do it too much because it's going to start running. I also print my pages on a laser printer. That's not going to run. Inkjets are more likely to have the ink run. You just have to pay attention to that if you're printing on an inkjet printer. So let those dry completely, and then I'm going to hot glue these pages all around the edge to my frames that I created. Now with this, I like to lay them all out and make sure that they're all at the same height because they're going to be hanging on the wall together. When I was at Lowe's, I also grabbed these cute little black tacks. I thought they would look great in the corners of my frames. So I'm just going to use my hammer. I love my pink hammer. That'll be linked below as well. And I'm just going to tack it into all four corners. And then I added some hangers on the back that I grabbed from Lowe's. I'm just going to hang these up on a simple nail. So I had an idea for a wall art piece and didn't know how it was all gonna work. And in the end, I love the way it turned out. So here's the steps I went to creating it. So I went to Lowe's and just bought a pre-cut board. I was already there and I saw this rectangular shaped board. I'm like, that's about the size that I need. So I grabbed that board. I also picked up some construction shims from Home Depot. I couldn't find these at Lowe's. I ended up ordering them online at Home Depot and just did like pick up in store. And I ended up using, I think, only 1 or 2 packages for this. It wasn't very many. So I laid out my shims and I started by painting them. So I painted some 2 different shades of pink. I also painted some shims white. And then I stained some with that same special walnut color by Mini Wax. Now with the darker pink color I didn't end up liking it. So I went and grabbed the paint color that I had used on Annabelle's accent wall, and I repainted the darker color pink, the new color, or the color from her room. And I don't even know why I didn't do that in the first place, because it looks so much better. And then with the other paint color, I wanted it to be a little bit more distressed, so I added some white paint on top of that. So with my board that I purchased, I measured so I could find the center line, and I drew a center line down the center of the board. Next, I lined the shims up so they were crossing over each other, and I picked a point on the line so that I tried to make them go straight up the line. Now, it wasn't perfect, but I got it as accurate as possible so that when they were all on there, it would look good. Once I kind of figured out my layout, then I came back in with wood glue and wood glued every single shim to my board. I let that dry completely overnight. Next, we came back in and we needed to cut off the edges. So we drew a line where it needed to be cut, and then we used a saw to cut each side. After using the saw, I needed to sand down the edges because some of them didn't look the best. I grabbed some 1x2 boards that I had around the garage, and I stained them and cut them down to size so that I could use them as a frame. To put them onto the sides, I used wood glue and then put the side pieces in place. And then we used some ratchet straps to hold them in place overnight. I did the same thing as well for the outer pieces. So this process did take us several days. You know, we had a lot of drying time that we had to do. And then from there, we hung it up over the toilet, and I think it makes a great statement piece, and I love the way it turned out. Whenever I put together one of these videos for you guys, there's always a project that causes me problems, and this next one was kind of that one where I kept on changing what I was doing. So I originally found this high-end rope display. It was $550. It was beautiful, really cool. I wanted to recreate something similar to this. So I started by grabbing a piece of board that I had already in my garage. It was just a thin piece of wood, no more than about a half an inch. I think it was actually a fourth of an inch. And I started by just tying a string to the end of my pencil and created a half circle. Then I pulled the string in and created another half circle.
So cliche. What I am trying to do is say I love you.
Then I went in with my saw to cut out this circle. Now I actually created some smaller circles thinking I was gonna add those. I ended up not doing that. I ended up just using that big, I'm calling it like a rainbow, that outside half circle, cutting that piece out, and I'm gonna be using the larger piece for my project.
Ooh, thought it was in my hands. Now I'm all confused. Turning gold into sand. Don't know what you do to me.
I also cut down a piece of 1x2 inch board that I'm going to be using for this project. I ended up cutting 2 of these, but I'm only using 1 for the project.
The way the things I planned, the things I would say, now I keep rambling on. I sound so cliche. What I am trying to do is say I love you.
For the 1x2" board, I wanted it to have like a whitewash finish. So I grabbed my Waverly white chalk paint, added some water to it, and brushed it onto my board. And then I immediately came back in with a paper towel and wiped off the excess. So it gave me that look of a whitewash appearance. I grabbed some twisted rope off of Amazon that I wanted to use for this project and love the way it turned out. It's like a really thick rope and it ended up looking really great. So with my half circle, I'm gonna start by measuring down at the bottom, and then I'm gonna hot glue up around the edge, and then I'm gonna cut the top portion so it's higher than my bottom portion. And I'll repeat this, adding the rope, making sure that they're nice and tight together so you don't see any of the wood coming through. Now, when I got to the end, I needed maybe 2 more ropes and I only had 1. So I ended up going back in and cutting some of my wood off so I didn't have to go and buy another whole container of the rope. And then I added that last rope piece in. I wanted the ends to have a frayed appearance, so I'm just going to undo the ends. Now here's where it got a little tricky too. I decided I wanted to dye the ends of them. So I thought I was gonna come in with a cream color. Well, that ended up not being the right color. So I have this tie-dye kit where I have a bunch of different colors, and I basically just mix water with all of my different tie-dyes. So I ended up mixing, I think, brown, a tan, and a yellow together to give me kind of like a light cream color. And I'm just gonna dip the ends on either side and let that sit. Well, when I was done doing that, I really didn't like the appearance of that. So I came back in with a blue color that I had on hand, mixed it with some water, again, dipped the ends in, and really liked the way it looked, you know, after I was completely done with it. Now, once that has a chance to dry, I'm gonna take that same wood board and I'm gonna hot glue it to the sides. Now, to hang this piece on the wall, you could always add a hanger to the back. I think it's too heavy to use command strips, so I would definitely put a hanger on the back and a nail on the wall and hang it up. So here's a look at how it turned out. In the end, I really like the way this looks. You could definitely customize this piece to go anywhere in your home. You could, change out how you dyed the colors. This project was $33 and the original was around $550. You guys know I love to recreate home decor that's just crazy expensive. Anthropologie has this really cute mirror and it's got little white fringe on it, but it's $498, which is crazy expensive, and I knew I could recreate it for so much cheaper. So those supplies that I grabbed for this project, I grabbed a 15-inch mirror off of Amazon. I also grabbed some cardboard at Dollar Tree. If you had cardboard on hand, you could use that. I just needed something that was a little bit thinner. So I grabbed one of their little cardboard poster things, I think that you use for like a science fair or a project. And then I also picked up 4 meters of white faux suede fringe off of Amazon. Don't worry, everything's linked for you down in the description box. And that's what I'm using for this project. It was honestly really easy to put together, so don't be intimidated by this project. I started by gluing my mirror onto my cardboard. Next, I wanted to cut out the cardboard, leaving about 1 inch between the edge of the cardboard and the mirror. Don't worry if this isn't completely exact because you're going to be covering it up with the fringe. Now, based on the fringe that I had enough to go around my mirror 3 times. So I started on the outside edge, and all I did was I took my fringe and I hot glued it down, trying to stay consistent around my cardboard being about the same level. Once I got around the cardboard, once hot gluing it, I did another pass through the middle of the cardboard. The last fringe that I put on was the fringe that meets up with the mirror. So I put the fringe just at the edge of the mirror so that you couldn't see a gap and you couldn't see the cardboard. Now, because this is lightweight, you can put it on your wall pretty easily with some command strips. Just get more of the heavy duty command strips. I'll link those for you as well. I just put this on the wall in my home when you first come in. And then at the end, I took off the protector of the mirror. That way I didn't do it during the project and I didn't get all the little handprints on it. And here's a look at how this fringe mirror turned out. So I also created 2 more printables that I wanted to add as art on my walls. I'll link those below for you as well. But I wanted these to be a lot larger. I also like these little wood frames, so I'm gonna grab 2 of those. These are $25 each. Whenever I'm printing off posters, I like to use a company called Printful. You can print anything at any size and they actually send it to you pretty quickly. So that's what I did with these 2 prints. I sent them off and got them within the week. So again, I'm going to take that plastic part out of the frame. I'm going to use the mat, and then I'm going to take the poster I printed off, center it up, and then I'm going to tape it to the back. And then I will add the components back into my frame. You can display these in so many different ways. So for one of them, I'm going to put in my office, and it's going to be next to this really cool antique window that I got. It's going to lean on the cabinet next to this window that I have. For my next picture, I'm just going to center it over my love seat, and I think it looks great there. So I went on Amazon and I was looking for a tapestry. If you don't want to use a tapestry, you could always use a shower curtain, but I couldn't find a shower curtain that I liked as much as the tapestries. Amazon has a wide selection of these. I spent a while looking through the different tapestries till I found one that I liked. So the one that I picked up was right under $15, and it was 60 inches by 50 inches. And they have ones that are even bigger than that. So you can really get something that's gonna cover your wall well. When I got the tapestry, it was all folded up and there was a lot of crease marks on it. So I went through and used my steamer and my iron to get out all the crease marks. If you end up leaving those in and you hang it up, it's just not gonna look good. I did at the end steam it as well because some of the creases were hard to get out, but just try before you put it all together to get all of the creases out before you even start this project. So I needed to create a frame to hang the tapestry on. This is really easy to do. All you need are 4 boards, and I like to grab just like the scrap boards at Lowe's or Home Depot or wherever, and I get the 1x2 inch boards. So I laid out my tapestry and then I put my boards around the edges of the tapestry. And I marked the boards where I needed to cut them to where I could fit the tapestry around the edges and staple it in place. Next, I took my framing boards and I cut them down to size. Then all you're gonna do is put them together like a big box, and then you're going to drill holes in the edge and add in your screws. It's really easy to create a frame. Now to assemble this, you're going to lay your tapestry flat on the ground with the side that you want to show facing down. You're going to put your frame on the back side. Then you're gonna set your frame on top of that. Now start at one area of your tapestry and you're going to fold it over to where it's just on the top edge, and you're gonna staple it in place. I will link to the staple gun that I use in the description box, and any other project that you see in this video, plus what I'm wearing, I always put it down in the description box. Now you're going to go to the opposite side that you just stapled on, and you want to concentrate on pulling the fabric as tight as possible, wrapping it up and stapling it in place. And you'll do it all along that side. Then take the tapestry and put it upright to staple the sides. It's really important at this step that you just pull it as tight as possible without, giving it any like weird creases, but you want the tapestry to be flat across the front. So as flat as you can get it will work great. After you get all 4 sides stapled, just go back in and cut off any excess fabric. Next, you can just use a simple screw to hang this on the wall. And if you still have any creases, just go back in with your steamer and steam them out. And for under $20, I have a huge wall art piece. So this next wall art piece was probably my most expensive to make, but honestly was probably my favorite as well. Macrame pieces are so popular right now. You can find them on any high-end site, and some of them can just go for a ton of money. I wanted to give you some options you could try to really elevate your macrame pieces. So you're gonna start with a stick or a board. We had this stick in our garage for probably a year now, but you could go outside, grab a stick. Anything that you wanna use for this project will work. You just need a long stick, or you could use a 1x2 board for this. I also grabbed something called wool chunky yarn. I picked this up off of Amazon. Now it's a little pricey, I'm gonna tell you, but I probably used maybe a third of this bundle. So you could actually probably buy less of this. I didn't know how much I was going to need. And you can also get it in other colors. I went with the basic white, but I think it would be really pretty in gray or blue or another color as well. So I pulled out the yarn and figured out how long I wanted to make my macrame pieces. So remember, you're going to be doubling this over, so you want it to be long enough, and you're just going to cut that. Now, once I cut one long piece, from there I took and pulled apart that one piece into 3 individual pieces. They're very thick pieces, so really you can use smaller portions. So one piece gave me 3 like strings that I could use. Now, to add it to my stick, I'm just gonna do a simple loop. Now, again, be really careful with this because you are going to be pulling off extra wool, so you kind of have to be delicate with this. I repeated this process by pulling off pieces, measuring how long that I needed them, and then again pulling apart those 3 pieces. I just went until I felt like I had enough pieces on my stick. I also grabbed some rope clips off of Amazon. Don't worry, all of these will be linked below for you guys. And they came in 4 different colors. I couldn't find one that just gave me that antique gold that I was looking for. So I probably have more supplies than I needed, but honestly, you could create maybe 3 or 4 of these with the supplies that I picked up. So I'm gonna be using the antique gold ones. And these clips are really cool. They just fit over your yarn, and then you just smush them together in the back and it creates a fun clip. So I'm going to start in the center section, and then as I go, I'm just going to kind of smooth out the wool, and then I'll place a clamp on it. And as I go, I'm going to gradually create like an angle pattern. I also decided to cut this so it was angled down with my clamps. So again, with this, you just have to be patient and trim it off, take a step back, look at it, and cut more if you need to. You guys are gonna have to let me know what you think of this piece down in the comments. I think it looks so nice. I wanna tell you, total for all the materials, I spent $80, but again, I could probably create at least 3 more of these with that $80, and I've seen these run upwards of $300 online. This next project was definitely my most inexpensive that I created. So when I was at the Restore, I always like to look in the cabinet section because there's always cool drawers or cabinet doors. And I found this set of 3 cabinet doors that I just thought, wow, these are like in perfect condition, and wouldn't these make a great grouping of wall art? So I went ahead and grabbed the 3 doors. They were $2 each. So I ended up spending $6 for these 3 cabinet doors. They were wood. They're gonna be great for my project. So my idea for this was I wanted to paint them in a formation that would make a really cool like grouping of 3 hanging on the wall. So I painted all 3 of them with the color Nomadic Desert. I'm just gonna use a roller to put the paint on. You could also use a brush as well. Once that completely dries, I'm gonna take the color Fawn by Waverly, which is like a brown color, and I'm gonna mix it in with that Nomadic Desert color. Then I'm going to take a brush and I'm going to create a wave pattern along the bottom edge there. And I'm going to do this across all 3 of my boards, making sure that they all are about the same height. And then I'm going to paint the bottom half with that fawn color.
Listen to the midnight radio. We can drive through the night. Hold on, wait all night. We can drive through the night, sing along to the midnight radio.
Next, I'm going to repeat the same thing by adding black to my paint, and then I'll create another wave pattern at the bottom, filling in the bottom portion with that black color. Now you want to make sure you cover everything really well. I only did 1 coat of paint and that seemed to be enough. Once these had a chance to dry, I styled them on my dresser, and you guys, I had all this paint on hand, so my cost for this project was only $6. I have been designing and decorating my new office space, and when looking around online, I found this wall art piece from Pottery Barn, and it was beautiful, but really $200 for this was way too much. So I knew that I could easily recreate it, and I thought, I gotta show you guys how I put this together because it's so easy and you can do it as well. So the main element of this piece are all of the slats that you see, and I counted them out. There's 31 of them. I think on my piece I ended up using 30. So I went to Lowe's and I was looking for boards. I wanted them to be 1 inch by 2 inch. So I found these boards. They were $2.19 a piece, and for each board I was able to get 3 slats out of it. So when I got home, I laid my board out and I measured 31 inches, and at 31 inches I made a mark, and I did that until I got 3 out of each board, and I did this with all of the boards that I was going to cut. Next, I'm going to line up the boards on my miter saw to cut them. With some of the boards, the wood was splitting, and so to correct that, I just slowed down and made sure when I cut it, I did it a lot slower and the boards were splitting a lot less. So I ended up having 30 boards. Next, I'm going to stain each of the boards with a color called Special Walnut. Now remember in the picture, there was all different levels of stain. So that's kind of what I'm going for here. So with some of my boards, I'm gonna stain the whole thing. Some I may stain half of it. Some I might just stain a little bit. And I'm just gonna kind of do a variation so that when I put all the boards together, I can kind of pick and choose and mix them around. Now, once I got the board stained, I felt like it was a little darker than I wanted it to be. And honestly, I wish I would have picked a lighter, more oak style stain. So what I did to make it look more like I was hoping it would be was I just came in and I sanded the edges and I sanded over the top. So what this did was just bring the wood back so that I kind of had that lighter wood look. So in the end, I was okay with the color. So now I need to go through and paint the other sides of my board. So I just took some painter's tape and I put it so that it was covering the stain area where I was going to paint with the black color. I'm going to use ink by Waverly to paint my boards, and you don't have to paint the sides because they're going to be put together pretty well. So all I'm going to be doing is painting the top and the bottom of my boards.
So how much you paint on the black is just going to depend on what you did for the stain. So if you have a board that was stained mostly, you'll just have a little bit of black. You just want to make sure that when you're finished with your boards, you have a good variety. Now I removed my tape right away. I didn't let it sit on there and it just peeled off really easily. So I put together a simple frame based on how long my 30 boards put together was. And I just cut the boards and I screwed them together so I would have a base to put my boards on. So the first thing I did was lay my boards out in an alternating pattern. You want to do this first before you glue anything down to make sure that you really kind of look at it and see if it's the way you want it. You can always make changes. Once I got all 30 boards laid out, I took a picture of it because sometimes when I see something in a photograph, it gives me an indication of what I need to change. I don't know, it's just something how my brain works, but you can do this however you want. And I did move a couple of boards after taking a picture of it. Now I bought the most heavy strength wood glue that I could find for this project. I'm gonna start on one side and I'm actually gonna add a really generous amount of wood glue. It ended up kind of coming out on the sides and the bottom, but I didn't mind because I wanted them to have quite a bit of wood glue. And I worked my way down, adding wood glue to all of the 30 pieces. Now, once you're done adding your wood glue, you want to make sure that your boards are nice and even before it dries. So go along the bottom and the top and make sure they just look nice and even. I also stained the edge of my boards because you will see them whenever it's hung up. Now to hang this up, we decided to hang it on a wire. I was envisioning this piece over the top of my couch in my office, and I couldn't be happier with the way it turned out. So my next piece, I was inspired to put this into my daughter's bedroom, but you could change the colors up and honestly put this anywhere. Honestly, the colors I used, you could probably use it pretty much anywhere. So I went to Lowe's and I picked up one of their half circles. And they have these half circles that are wood. I used my saw and I cut it down the middle. So I had two pieces. I'm only gonna be using one, so the other one I can use for a future project. So first I'm going to stain the wood using special walnut. I'm just going to put it on with a foam brush and immediately wipe off any excess. So I picked out 3 yarn colors that I thought would be great for this project. Two of them were like a plum and lavender type color, and the other one was more of a beigey color. And then I went on the back of my piece and I measured off, so I had a little section in the middle, and then I measured out a couple of inches so I could have another little section. That way I knew where I needed to glue my yarn. So I took my first color and I'm gonna wrap it around one of my mats, and then I'll cut it off at the top and cut it off at the bottom. Then I'm going to take a bundle of the yarn and just hot glue it to the back. So I'm going to start with the middle section. I'm going to repeat that wrapping technique and cutting for the outsides, which are more of a beigey color. For the ends, I'm going to use a light lavender color, so I'm going to wrap it around, cut it, and hot glue it to the outside edge. Next, I'm going to take my project and I'm going to put it out flat on my table, kind of brushing it down. I want it to cut straight across, so I'm just going to pull the yarn down and cut it straight across the best that I can. Now to hang this on your wall, you just add a picture hanger to the back, and here's a look at this adorable wall hanging.
All right, so I'm in the frame section of IKEA. I'm gonna get some really cheap, large poster frames that I can use to create some fun wall art. Okay, so these white frames right here, they're pretty big. I think are they 24 by 36? Yes. And they're $19.99. So I'm gonna grab 3 of these. With my 3 white frames, I'm going to take out the mats that are already inside. I also picked up 3 white poster boards. I grabbed mine at Dollar Tree, but you can also get them at Walmart or so many other places. So I'm gonna lay my poster board out, and then I'm gonna put the mat on top of it. I want to cut off any excess poster board because I'm going to try to make this like a continual art piece, so I don't want it to have too much excess, but I can't cut off too much because I need to be able to cover it with the mat. So I'm just leaving maybe like a centimeter around the edges, and I'm going to mark where I'm going to cut on my poster board. I think that I only had to cut off one side. I didn't have to cut off the top, and I'm just going to cut out my poster board. All right, so this is when the super fun part comes into place. Now, if you are not an artist, if you think that you cannot create artwork, I am gonna show you something really simple you can do. If you can paint in between lines, you can do this. So I laid my 3 poster boards out, and I'm using the matte side. Most poster boards have like a matte and a shiny side, so I'm using the matte side for mine. Next, I'm going to get a collection of blue colors. So I just grabbed some of my Waverly blue colors. You can really use anything. You could use acrylic paint, but I just used what I had on hand. Next, I'm gonna create just wavy lines that I can fill in with this blue paint. So I wanna start at one edge, and I want it to continue over all of my poster boards. And I'm gonna do that with a pencil. That way, if I make a mistake, I can always erase it and go again.
Now I'm going to use a foam brush and I'm going to paint the top layer. I want this to kind of be a light to dark situation, so I'm going to start with my lightest color up top. Then I'm going to go down and do my third color. That way I don't accidentally mix the two colors together. At this point, I'm gonna go back in and do a second coat for my top and third layer. I'm gonna let that dry overnight. You probably don't have to let it dry overnight, but I didn't have time to do it that day, so I came back the next day, and now I'm going to paint the colors for the second as well as the fourth. And these are gonna end up getting 2 coats as well. Now, some tricks whenever you're adding in your paint, make sure that you just do a nice line along the edge with your brush, going just as smooth as you can. Once you get that nice line, you can come back in and add your paint. Also, make sure that you're covering up those pencil lines that we created when we were drawing our outline. Now, once these are completely dry, I'm going to add them to my frames. A trick to make your prints be a lot more vibrant and stand out is you want to take out the glass or plastic to your frame, especially since sometimes the plastic can be kind of cheap looking, so I'm not going to add the plastic back in. I'm going to put the matte back in, and then I'm going to put my poster on top of it. I'm going to use some painter's tape along the edges to hold it in place. And then I'll just add in the backing. These 3 pieces come with hangers, so you can just hang them to your wall, and these make such a great statement and really fill up a wall. If you're trying to tie in a specific color to your space, I think this is a great way to do it. One of my favorite things to create in the fall is wreaths, but I wanted to give you some other options you could create with florals that were actually, really neat, large wall pieces. So I came up with this idea, and honestly, I love the way it turned out. And it's a massive piece of wall art. So you're going to want to go to Dollar Tree, Walmart, Hobby Lobby, anywhere that you can purchase florals. You're gonna gather some large fall color florals that you think will work together. I'm gonna start with these 2 large bundles. These are actually from Hobby Lobby, and I'm gonna take those large bundles and put the bottom portions together so that the top of the stems are pointing one way on one of the bundles and the other way on the other. I'm gonna take the zip tie that was already on the bundle, and I'm just going to zip tie these 2 together. Now, I wanted the edges of my branches to kind of be spread out at the end. So as I was doing this, I was kind of spreading the branches out on either side. Next, I came in with some wheat style branches from Hobby Lobby. I cut them off the stems and I just placed them where I thought they looked nice.
We got one summer, so let's make it count. You make me feel like everything.
And then I used my hot glue gun to hot glue them underneath those existing stems. You want to make sure that you tuck that bottom piece so that you don't see it.
You'll be on my mind. I'll be dreaming about this till the end of.
And then Dollar Tree has these gorgeous stems out right now that I'm so in love with them. They're so natural and beautiful looking. I'm gonna take 3 of those and place those in my arrangement. The more variation and texture that you can have, the more fuller your display is going to look.
Next, I flipped a piece on the front and I wanted to cover up that center area. So I grabbed a couple of those wheat branches. I twisted them together so you couldn't see the bottom ends and then hot glued that in the center. So that's gonna cover up any imperfections from where I was gluing or zip tying. Next, I'll flip the entire piece on the back. And as I was doing this, some of the pieces were kind of coming undone. So then I went in with some additional hot glue just to really reinforce things. You could also add in zip ties on the back as well. Now to hang this, I wanted it to look really natural. So I grabbed some of my nautical rope. I'll link the one in the description box that I use. And I'm going to just be hot gluing it to the sides of my branches. So in order for it to stay, I'm really gonna have to get that glue on several of the branches so that the nautical rope can hold and be secure in place. You can hang this on your wall with a simple nail. I hung this up in my bedroom. It is massive and I just love it. You guys are gonna have to let me know what you think of this piece down in the comments. For this next project, we're gonna do a pretty massive wall hanging. So I have been low-key working on a renovation for my master bedroom. It's going to come out on the channel, but it's gonna take a while because we're doing a lot of things. Like we had to get our ceilings fixed, we're redoing the floors. You're gonna see it eventually, but it's one of those projects that's probably gonna take us longer to do than most of our DIYs. I have a lot of large blank walls in my room, and I was watching the Dishonest Truth DIY. They have a great YouTube channel and they did a project like this. Their project was the inspo for my project. So you want to grab a board. I actually grabbed one that was in my garage. It's a 1x2 board and my board was 50 inches long. Next, I stained the board with a color called Golden Oak. It's been kind of my favorite color lately. So I'm just gonna wipe it on and then wipe off any excess with a paper towel. You could use any stain color for this. Next, I'm going to use one of my favorite little macrame yarns. I will link it down below for you as well. So I needed to get 200 pieces of macrame yarn. So what I did was I took some kind of heavy duty plastic. This is the plastic that are in those IKEA frames. And I just started to wrap the macrame around the plastic. You could do this with anything that you have on hand. It ended up, my length was about 31 inches, but really this is personal preference. So I wrapped it around about 50 times. Then I cut one side off and then I cut the other side off. So I took all the strings and made a little bundle. So I ended up having 4 bundles of 50 macrame strings. So I'm going to take one of my groupings and bend it in half. Then I'm going to take some painter's tape and I'm going to tape off about, I would say, a little bit more than halfway up, maybe 3/4 of the way up. And this is going to help us when we go to paint. Now this is where you can really customize this project depending on the colors you like. So I went to Sherwin-Williams wanting to find a light blue and a dark blue color. I ended up grabbing Blustery Sky and Rainstorm, and I picked these up in samples. Whenever you buy samples, they're really inexpensive and it's the way to go. So next you're going to get a dish or a disposable little container, and I'm going to fill it up about halfway with water. Then I'm going to dump in my lighter paint color and I'm going to mix that around. Then I'm going to take each of my bundles and dip them into where the tape line is at.
That way I have a consistent tape line for all of my dyeing. And this is a great way to dye your fabric. Now you want to make sure you get all of the pieces down in there. Let it set for a little bit, make sure they're coated, kind of pull it up, see if they're coated. If not, put it back in there for more. And then you're going to take it, pull it out, let all the excess drip off, and then you can put it over to dry. I had the same plastic that I used to wrap the cord and just let it sit out on that. Now I let this dry 24 hours before I came in with my darker color. So I did the same technique by adding in water with my dark color. Now when I did this, I realized that there wasn't a huge variation in the color, like it was very subtle. So what I decided to do was add in some black paint to make it a little bit darker. So I mixed the paint around. Now I did run into a problem whenever I started to dip. I realized that some of the black paint had settled to the bottom. And so if the pieces were touching the bottom, it was getting covered with black. So I had to be a little bit careful. So I suggest mixing it up better than I did. When I dip into the darker color, I'm not going to put it in all the way. I'm just going to put a little bit of the bottom portion in. Now, I wish that I would have gotten a really dark color. So that may be something, or my blue that I used at the beginning, maybe if it was a little bit lighter. So make sure your colors are really contrasting. So do that for all 4 of your colors and let them sit out to dry again. Again, I let this sit out a day. Then after a day, I removed the tape and they still needed some time to sit out. So I actually laid them out flat and gave them, probably at least a couple more hours to dry out before I did anything with them. Now, if you've seen any of my projects before where I've done this similar technique, I just laid out my board and then I'm going to take all of the strips and lay them out on the back of my board. Now, this does not have to be perfect. They do not have to be evenly spaced. Just do the best you can, kind of eyeball it. Then you're going to come through and hot glue every single piece down. Once you've hot glued, now you have to come in, and if you have any pieces that are on the top, you want to cut those off. Now to hang this on the wall, I thought I'd be able to get away with command strips, and that's what I initially tried, but since it was a bigger piece, I ended up having to get hooks. So I recommend using like maybe some little picture hanger hooks on the back for this. But all you have to do is hang it up on your wall, then come in and cut off any excess at the bottom, like any pieces that kind of look weird. Mine actually did pretty well. I didn't have a ton of pieces that had any issues. But here is a look at how this wall hanging turned out. I can't wait to move it to my master bedroom and share that with you guys eventually.
All right, so I'm over looking at the picture frames. I like this one. I like the size of it. It's $8. The frame could definitely use painting. The thing that I really like about it is the size, and then it also has a nice mat that I can use. The white mat is in good shape, and I have an idea for it. So now that I have the frame, I want to find a piece of fabric that is interesting that I can put in my frame. So I'm at Savers right now. They have a ton of different fabrics to choose from. So I'll see if I can find anything. I think I found the perfect piece of fabric for a frame. It's white and yellow. I could always dye it to a different color, and it's $2.99. My first step was to remove all the components of this massive frame. I thought I got a great deal on it for $8. So I'm taking off the backing, and then I'm also going to take out the picture as well as the glass. Next, I'm going to be painting my frame. Now I started with a color called Mineral. I actually painted 2 coats with this, and in the end, I felt like it was too gray for what I was going for. And I actually went back and repainted this with a color called Fawn. That happens sometimes. Sometimes I paint it and it's just not the right color, but I was really glad that I went back and, made the change. Next, I'm going to be using some craft paper that you can pick up at Dollar Tree. And I'm just going to put this down as a barrier for my piece. And I'm going to cut off any excess. I'm just gluing this directly to the previous picture that was on there. The reason I'm using the craft paper is because the fabric I'm using is see-through. I decided to stick with the color of it. Yellow is really in right now, so I wanted to use that same color. So I'm just going to be using painter's tape to wrap it around the edge. The hard part here was just trying to make sure that I got it as even as possible. I'm gonna put all of the components back in, making sure it's really clean before I lay it down. Next, I'm gonna add in my mat, and then I'm gonna add in the backing. Here you can see I went back in with that fawn color. This is just more of a brown color, and it actually is kind of a taupe color. And I thought it played really nicely with the brown in the background of that craft paper. I ended up adding a little bit of brown to deepen the color a little bit, but that's what I love to do. I love mixing colors until I have what I'm going for. I put everything back in once again, but really it was totally worth it. And in the end, this turned out so nice. This project cost me under $15, and I think it looks awesome. This next trend is with creating wall art with craft paper. So I decided I would make my own with products from Dollar Tree. So I picked up a roll of craft paper. I also picked up a really long bamboo skewer. Now they have these out at Dollar Tree in like their section where it's like their barbecue type stuff. So this is the time of year where they're going to be putting these out. So I have a pack of them. I bought mine last year, but grab a pack of them because they're great for projects. So I started by taking the skewer and sticking it through the paper. Then I used some twine that I already had, and I'm going to tie it to both sides. Now, after I tied it, I did go back in and add a little glue to the edge just to make sure it was really secure. Next, you're going to roll out your paper however long you want it to be for your project. Now, since the paper is in a roll, it's going to naturally roll up, and I didn't want that to happen. So I found some wood that I already had on hand. These are actually shims that I purchased for another project. You could use a piece of wood, you could use a piece of cardboard, pretty much anything here. And what I did was I glued it at the bottom of the paper, and then I wrapped it up one time and glued it in place. Now, whenever I hang this up, it's going to weigh down the bottom so it's nice and straight. Then I took the paper and flipped it over to the front side. I picked up a sponge in like the little loofah section at Dollar Tree, and I'm going to cut the sponge in half so I have a half circle. Next, I'm going to use my Waverly white chalk paint. I'm going to make a fun pattern across the edge. Now, this I just kind of did randomly. Sometimes I'd take my half circle and put them both the same direction. Sometimes I'd face them to each other, flip them out. Really, this is the fun part, being creative. I just tried to not use the same pattern next to each other in the little grid. And I did this all the way up. You could repeat this pattern for however big you wanted your piece to be. Let this dry completely, and then you have a really cute boho wall hanging to hang up. So I don't know if you guys have this, but I will be at Dollar Tree and I will see an item and I will think, okay, I know exactly how that would look, but then I don't really know if it's going to turn out. So that's kind of how I felt with this wall hanging. In the end, I like it, but it was definitely a process to get there. So I found these tomato cages at Dollar Tree. So I bought maybe 4 or 5 of them, and I wanted to use the hoops. Now I know that Dollar Tree sells larger hoops, but I really liked that these were smaller, and I knew that I could create a cluster of them and they could be really cool. First thing I did was just detach them so I was left with just the rings. Next, I grabbed some nautical rope that they sell at Dollar Tree, and I just covered the tops of them with nautical rope. Then I had to move out my table to really, see how this would look. And so I put them down in a formation where I felt like it would look nice up on the wall. Now to attach them all to each other, I took twine and I just wrapped the twine around maybe 3 or 4 times. Once I got all of them connected with twine, I turned it on the back and I hot glued the back together and cut off the excess twine. I think this part may have taken the longest, so that was kind of tedious. So I don't know, if you guys have a better idea of how I could have connected those, let me know down in the comments, but that was the only way I could think of where you didn't see a lot of glue. Next, I wanted something really cool and visual to put in the ring. So I found this scarf whenever I was thrifting, and I actually used it on one of my thrifting projects, but I had just enough that I thought that I could fill the little rings. So what I did was I took that fabric, stretched it out, and put hot glue around the back of a ring, placed it down, and then I cut it as close to the edge as I could because I didn't want any excess. That was my last step. From there, I just hung it on the wall with command strips because it really wasn't heavy at all. I would love to know which of these projects you guys liked best. It really helps me with planning future videos. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe. I post 2 DIYs each week, and I'll talk to you guys on our next one. Bye.